So today I'm doing my mid-month June wrap-up. That is to say, all the books that I read during the first half of June. And I think there were 8 of them, so stick around to see what they were. Hey friends, Roger here, and welcome to my channel, Roger's Reads. So today I am doing my June mid-month wrap-up, and I always divide my wrap-up into 2 parts, or I usually do anyway. And you know, this is actually the second time I'm recording this, because the first time, the first 12 minutes of my video, it was all blurry. So I'm re-recording these 12 minutes. So if you see a little bit of inconsistency between the first half and the second half of the video, that's why. So, on to the books. And again, most of the books that I read this month, or during the first half of this month, were ebooks, so I'll put the covers up above. So the first book that I read was entitled The Bright Lands by Fram. And it is difficult to believe that this is a debut novel, as it was not only addictive and gripping, but also incredibly well written. This is a riveting supernatural thriller/horror novel full of suspense, twists, tension that takes place in a creepy small town with quite an assortment of fascinating characters. And it follows our main character named Joel, who begins to investigate his brother's disappearance. And in doing so, he unearths a plethora of painful memories. Memories that he thought he'd left behind him after being shamed out of town nearly, well, I think it was like 10 years prior. And this was surrounding a huge scandal. So, yeah, he ended up being shamed out of town at that point. So as he begins to investigate his brother's disappearance, he ends up exposing the town's darkest secrets. Because Joel wants answers, and he's willing to do whatever it takes to get them, even if it puts his own life in danger. So as he gets closer to the truth, it eventually becomes clear that the town itself is responsible for the evil goings-on within it. And on top of that, there's a frightening urban legend at the heart of it all. So, you know, I actually thought that this was going to be like a small town mystery story. So I was a bit gobsmacked when the horror and supernatural elements came into play, though I will say pleasantly surprised.
So, if you think you haven't figured out as you're reading it, well, guess again.
And that's what I enjoyed about this story, about how unpredictable it was. Now, I was a bit surprised, though, when the story went
super dark
and took on an overall sense of foreboding, hints of menace, and the general feeling that something majorly was off. So what we end up with then is a razor-witted, intense, and brutal look at the modern human condition. A tale of twisted narratives fueled by obsession, which resulted in quite a tense and unsettling read. The Bright Lands is a serpentine tale of betrayal, madness, and murder. But interestingly, it's also about casting off shame and stigma. At its core, it's a novel rooted with human failings, the dangers of bigotry and closed-mindedness of our own society, leading to many of the characters facing insurmountable demons, demons resulting from the suppression of self and the suppression of others. There is definitely a deeper story within the pages here, and parts of it speak to the divisiveness of the world in which we live. Additionally, the author explores several other important themes in the story. There's sexuality, religion, betrayal, drugs, predation, complicated family dynamics, racism, conformity, and the confusion that coming of age can bring along with it. I really liked how the story was told from alternating point of views, allowing us to see the events through multiple lenses and perspectives. And though there are several pivotal events in the story, at its heart, Bright Lands is a character-driven story where each character has something to hide. And all of their stories then come together to weave a dark and intricate tale that draws you in until the very end. So what we end up with then is a pitch dark, terrifying story that explores what we're capable when our backs are against the wall. Now let me say, however, that Bright Lands is quite a disturbing novel with pretty explicit graphic content, so it might not be appropriate for more sensitive readers. So all in all, this was an edge-of-your-seat page-turner, more of a horror novel actually than a thriller, that kept me guessing until the explosive ending. And though it wasn't quite what I expected, I did enjoy the wild ride that it took me on. So the next book that I read during the first half of June was entitled Rainbow Boys by Alex Sanchez. And I actually ended up reading this for actually 2 readathons in June, the Queer Lit Readathon and the Prideathon. And I already posted my blog for the Queer Lit Readathon, and I will put a card up above so you can check it out if you like. So back to Rainbow Boys. So this is a coming-of-age story that follows 3 very different high school boys, Jason, Kyle, and Nelson. So Jason is a high school basketball jock who's secretly attracted to guys. Kyle is a swim star and maybe kind of a nerd. And Nelson, who is somewhat flamboyant, is out and proud to the entire world, and because of it, suffers extreme bullying at school. So in this book, the 3 lives of these boys intertwine, and the story starts out with kind of a love triangle in which Nelson is in love with Kyle, Kyle is in love with Jason, and Jason has begun having inappropriate thoughts about Kyle. And remember, he's the one who is supposedly straight. So though I'm not generally a fan of love triangles, this one was resolved rather quickly and ended up not being the focus of the story. Thank goodness. So the book alternates then between each boy's perspective, and we experience through their eyes their fears, their friends, their relationship with their parents, all the while trying to survive high school. Now, even though the book is dated in some ways and things are definitely much better today, such as the zero tolerance at schools, the rules at schools regarding bullying, I feel that it's still really relevant as it shows what a lot of teens still go through. In fact, the book delves into a lot of serious topics that are pertinent to teens, such as homophobia, bullying, first love, safer sex, HIV and AIDS, alcoholism, family acceptance, parental abuse, and self-esteem. So I thought this book did an excellent job at depicting the struggles and challenges of being a gay teen in a judgmental and narrow-minded society. And I thought it was a lot of fun journeying with the 3 boys as they tried to figure out who they were and how they fit in at this mostly bigoted high school. But at the root of this story was a journey of self-acceptance, which I thought the author handled exceptionally well. And I'll definitely be reading the next 2 books in this series, which I have over here on my shelves. So the next book that I read, I also read this for the Queer Lit Readathon, was entitled Double Feature, Attack of the Soul-Sucking Brain Zombies / Bride of the Soul-Sucking Brain Zombies, written by Brent Hartinger. So I'll start off first by saying that there are no real zombies in the book. So
now that that's out of the way, on to the book.
Now this is the 3rd book in the Russell Middlebrook series, and as I thoroughly enjoyed the first 2, I couldn't wait to delve into this one. So the story is actually told in 2 parts. And the first part follows Russell Middlebrook, our narrator, and we learn that he and his friends, Min and Gunner, have signed up to be extras in a zombie movie that's being filmed locally. Now, after being hurt by his boyfriend, Kevin, which we learned about in the previous books, Russell is now dating someone new, a boy he met at summer camp, who unfortunately lives 800 miles away. Now, to complicate matters even further, it becomes clear that Kevin, Russell's ex, is trying to win Russell back, causing Russell to doubt his feelings for Otto, which is the boyfriend who lives 800 miles away. Kevin even goes so far as to join the cast of film extras in order to get closer to Russell. Now, if that's not enough to throw Russell's entire world into a tailspin, his parents learn that he is gay and they do not take it well. So in the first part of the book, Russell has to decide whether he would break up with Otto, who after all lives 800 miles away, and get back together with Kevin, or stay with Otto and put his and Kevin's relationship behind him once and for all. So then we move into the second part of the book. And what's interesting about this is that it's told from the point of view of Russell's friend Min. And we get to experience all the same events from the first book, but through the eyes of Min. However, there is the added intrigue of Min beginning to date one of the girls from the film cast, extras cast, Lee her name was. A girl who has made it clear to out and proud Min that she has no interest in coming out at the moment. So Min then has to decide whether she's willing to date someone who's not totally out. Now, I think that this is referred to as a flip book, where the events in each half of the book are told from a different character's point of view. What was especially fun about this story was how Russell and Min's separate stories tie together in interesting ways. And we learned that we don't get the whole story during Russell's narration, and there's actually a lot more going on in the background. So yeah, I really ended up loving the story and enjoyed the unique format of the two parts of the book. And though I didn't find it quite as good as the first two books in this series, it was still a super fun read with an excellent storyline and compelling, fully developed, relatable characters. I also enjoyed the distinct voices of our two narrators and seeing the events in the book from each of the unique perspectives. And I believe that there is one more book in this series which I definitely plan on picking up. So the next book that I read was entitled This Is What It Feels Like by Rebecca Barrow. And there's also a book that I read for the Queerlit Readathon. So the story follows three teenage girls, Dia, Jules, and Hannah, who used to be inseparable best friends and bandmates. In fact, they started their own group and ended up being somewhat successful. But then certain events broke their friendship and the group apart. And now it's 2 years later, and an opportunity presents itself in the form of a music competition. So the girls have to decide whether they can and should put the band back together and attempt to mend their friendship. So what we end up having here are three extraordinarily complex and flawed girls who are each dealing with some serious issues that prevent them from fully living their lives. I really love the representation in this book, as all three girls were black, I do believe. Yes, because one of them referred to themselves as three black girls, and several of the side characters were also people of color. We also have some LGBTQIA+ representation with Jules, who is a lesbian, and Autumn, who a side character, who is also a lesbian and plus-sized. So though this was a delightful read with the theme of female friendship at its core, it also delves into some pretty hard-hitting topics. There was grief, toxic relationships, teen pregnancy, addiction, trust, mistrust, recovery, and sexuality, all of which were handled expertly and sensitively by the author. Now, I'm actually going to be doing a review of this book, and where I'll go into more depth, so you keep an eye out for that. The next book that I read was entitled In an Absent Dream, written by Seanan McGuire. And this is the fourth book in the Wayward Children series, and maybe my favorite one thus far. And though they are all connected, each can be read as a standalone. I actually started this series out of order, so you can delve in at any time. So this story follows Lundy, a friendless, serious, rather rigid, rule-loving girl who's feeling a little bit disenchanted by the fact that her entire life is planned out for her and that most of the opportunities are reserved for boys. So one day she finds a magical doorway to a different world of the Goblin Market, where she quickly learns that here everything strictly revolves around the idea of giving and receiving fair value. That is to say, everyone must contribute and pay fairly, never taking advantage of others in the process. Now, if you don't give fair value, you incur debt, which eventually makes itself visible physically. So in this way, you never forget what you owe. So it's the market itself that enforces this rule, and incurring large amounts of debt, that is to say, not giving fair value, results in serious consequences. So in this story, we once again see the theme of children who don't quite fit into their world, so discover a portal to a world that's more suited to them, though they always seem to lose something in the process. So this was such a moving and enchanting story of self-discovery, and the author really managed to bring this world to life in a vivid and exciting way. However, the story also seemed to be more heart-wrenching than the others, and the author also gives us here themes of friendship, acceptance, loss, and sacrifice, resulting in a more bittersweet feel to it. So Lundy ends up learning some important yet heartbreaking lessons. But though this book doesn't have a totally happy ending, we know how Lundy's story turns out as we meet her in the first book. So in this way, it is a satisfying conclusion. So all in all, this evocative little book hooked me right in, and I can't wait to read the next one in this series. So the next book that I read was entitled Heartstopper, written by Alice Oseman, and this was another book that I read for the readathon. So this is a poignant graphic novel that started out as a webcomic and follows our main character, Charlie Spring, a 14-year-old gay kid at a British school for boys who's in year 10. So one day, Nick Nelson, the popular and handsome year 11 school rugby star, joins one of Charlie's classes, and the boys end up sitting next to each other. And they quickly then become friends and soon are spending all of their time together. Now subsequently, Charlie finds himself falling for Nick, whom Charlie is certain is straight, and braces himself for the inevitable heartbreak that is sure to follow. So I thought this was the sweetest story about two boys coming to terms with their feelings for each other. It was so much fun watching their friendship develop and how they grew closer and closer as the story progressed. Heck, Nick even manages to convince Charlie to join the rugby team. So I found Heartstopper to be a wonderfully endearing coming-of-age story about first love. And though it certainly is a heartwarming romance, there's also quite a bit more to it than that, as the story also touches on friendship, bullying, homophobia, and even sexual consent and sexual harassment. Now, given that I'm quite a visual person, the aesthetic of a graphic novel matters quite a bit to me, as much as the quality of the story itself. So I have to enjoy what I'm looking at, and in this case, I certainly did. I really fell in love with the art style in this book, and I thought it was really, really well done. So yeah, first of all, I fell in love with the art, then slowly for the blossoming friendship / romance that happened in this book. There are also some beautiful spreads in this book of art without any words that perfectly capture the essence of the characters. And the story itself is fantastic, engaging, and wonderfully captures those little moments at the beginning of a new friendship. And as I'm one for the slow burn, I felt like I hit the jackpot with this lovely little book. I loved how soft and gentle the boys were, with them blushing many, many times throughout the novel. Alice Oseman crafted two incredibly sweet characters here and an equally sweet story that I thoroughly enjoyed. And I already purchased books 2 and 3 of this series. Also have those right on my shelves somewhere. And I can't wait to continue on with this story, and I'm probably going to do so sooner rather than later. So the next book that I read this month was entitled Totally Joe, written by James Howe. So this was such a fun book. And this is the second book in the Misfits series, but can be read as a standalone. So this middle grade series follows a group of friends, and I believe each book in this series is told from one of these friends' point of view. So Totally Joe is told from the point of view of Joe Bunch, an optimistic and gay 12-year-old boy who is given the assignment to write his alpha biography, that is to say, the story of his life from A to Z, which he writes in diary format. So things get especially interesting once he gets to the letter C, which stands for Colin Briggs, Joe's secret boyfriend. So through the course of the book, as Joe works from A to Z, he bears his soul in the pages. And we follow him throughout the year as he realizes that he's gay and attempts to figure out what that means for him and his life. So via the pages of this assignment, we get to read along as Joe comes out to his family, finds a boyfriend, all the while navigating the tricky waters of middle school. We get to experience firsthand what life is like for an out 12-year-old boy and the issues and challenges, as well as the joys and delights that he faces. It's also worth noting that Joe is quirky and somewhat colorful and certainly not afraid to be different, which unfortunately attracts the attention of bullies. But what was beautiful about this book was the unconditional support of his family and friends throughout his coming out process and his difficulties at school. It was also heartwarming to see the positive change that Joe, his friends, and their parents were able to bring about at school, including issues of harassment and bullying. It was really nice to see the adults in the story step up and take responsibility. But yeah, I really loved Joe's vibrant, bubbly personality and bright, optimistic outlook, and it was a joy to read his story. And now I want to read the other books in the series as well. But yeah, Totally Joe, definitely worth a read. So the last book that I read in the first half of June was entitled The Ninth Life by Taylor B. Barton. So when I heard that this book was about a queer, non-binary cat who comes back as a boy, that was all I needed. And indeed, this was quite an unusual read. So the story follows our main character, Caesar, a house cat who is nearing the end of his 8th life. And over the course of his previous lives, has been incarnated as several different types of cats. And I believe his first life was a tiger. But now, during his 8th life, he loves his human, a girl named Ophelia, the person who rescued him from the shelter. And as he's nearing his death, he wishes with all his heart to come back to Ophelia for his 9th and final time. So he dies, and now he's in the in-between, and he makes a deal with the goddess Zazma to come back to Ophelia one final time, even though the goddess warns him that such a wish will come with a steep cost. But Caesar agrees, and when he wakes up, he discovers that he is not in the body of a cat, but rather the body of a human boy, a 17-year-old boy named Austin Price, to be exact. So it turns out that when Austin was resuscitated after suffering a cardiac arrest, Caesar's soul was thrust into the young man's body, and the young man's soul moved on to wherever it is souls go to. So now our feline friend has to figure out how to navigate this final life as a human. Now what's interesting here is that Caesar has no memory of Austin's prior life as a human, and as it turns out, the Austin who died had quite a messy past with numerous complicated entanglements. We also learned that Austin had a complicated romantic relationship with his male roommate Cooper, and now Austin/Cooper finds himself falling for the boy as well. Now, of course, we have Cooper trying to adjust to this new Austin, given that Austin has no memory of their past. So what we have here also is Cooper, who is kind of in mourning for the boy and the love that is now lost. So this aspect of the story was kind of heartbreaking. So this way the relationship between Austen and Cooper is especially raw and intense. Now to complicate matters even further, Austen/Caesar's heart is being pulled toward Ophelia, leading to quite a confusing and messy situation. So what we end up with here then is a heartfelt, character-driven story about love, friendship, loss, grief, identity, lies, secrets, with all of our characters trying to work through their feelings for each other. So this was really an utterly enchanting read with beautiful flowing prose, powerful characterization, and a gripping premise. Now, I will mention that this is an ARC that I received and it's not yet out, but the release date is September 15th. But if it sounds like something you'd enjoy, you can order it from your favorite bookseller. And that is it for part 1 of my wrap-up. Look for part 2 probably towards the beginning of next month. So how about you? What are you reading this month? Let me know in the description. And that about does it. As always, I thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate all of your support, and I'll talk to you all in the next video. Roger and out.